I used to think the worst thing that could happen at a bachelorette party was someone drinking too much and crying in a bathroom stall. I was wrong. The worst thing that can happen is finding out, while glitter is still in your hair and your veil is still crooked on your head, that your best friend since kindergarten was never really yours at all. She was theirs. She had been theirs the whole time. My name is Renata Solís. I'm 34 years old. And 3 months before I was supposed to walk down an aisle in a white dress and become a Whitmore, I sat across from a woman I'd known for 29 years and asked her one question. She answered it with silence. That silence told me everything the Whitmore family had spent 2 years trying to hide. I want to take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start at the bachelorette party. It starts the night I met Daniel Whitmore's parents for the first time, at a dinner that lasted 3 hours and left me feeling like I'd failed a test I hadn't known I was taking. Daniel and I had been together for 14 months when he brought me to Ashford Hills, the suburb 40 minutes outside the city where his parents, Richard and Carolyn Whitmore, lived in a house that had 6 bedrooms and a tennis court nobody used. Daniel had warned me in the car. He'd said, "They're formal. They just take a little warming up." He said it the way people say it when they mean the opposite. He meant, "They're cold and they will judge you, and I'm sorry in advance, but I love you, so please don't let them see that they've gotten to you." Carolyn Whitmore opened the door in a cream-colored blouse and pressed slacks, her pearl earrings perfectly level, her smile the kind that lives only in the muscles around the mouth and never reaches the eyes. She hugged Daniel for a long moment, pressing her cheek to his, murmuring something I couldn't hear. Then she turned to me. She looked at me the way a person looks at a piece of furniture they didn't pick out and aren't sure they want in the room. "Renata," she said. "What a lovely name. Is it a family name?" I told her it was my grandmother's name. She nodded slowly, like that was the correct answer to a question she hadn't actually cared about. Richard shook my hand at the entryway. He was tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who had learned to convey power through stillness. He said, "Good to finally meet you," in a tone that suggested the word finally held a history I wasn't privy to. Dinner was rack of lamb and a Bordeaux that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, which I knew because Daniel told me quietly while Carolyn was in the kitchen. The table conversation moved through predictable territory: Daniel's work at his father's commercial real estate firm, Richard's new development project in the financial district, and then, like a door swinging open, me. Where did I grow up? What did my parents do? My father had been a high school music teacher in San Marcos, Texas. My mother ran a small alterations shop out of our garage until I was 12, when she expanded into a storefront on Cielo Boulevard that she still ran today. I said it plainly, because I was proud of it. I watched Carolyn take a slow sip of her wine. "How industrious," she said. That was the word she used. Industrious. Not admirable. Not impressive. Industrious, the way you'd describe a particularly efficient ant. After dinner, while Richard and Daniel talked in the study, Carolyn walked me through the house. It was the kind of tour that isn't really a tour, it's an inventory. She showed me the oil portrait of Daniel at 16 that hung in the hallway. The shelves of family photographs arranged by decade. The guest room that had been redecorated 3 times. And then, almost as an aside, a framed photograph on the sideboard near the staircase. A young woman, dark-haired, laughing at something off camera. Beautiful in the way of someone who has never had to work to be beautiful. "That's Genevieve," Carolyn said. She let the name sit there a moment before continuing. "Daniel dated her for 5 years. Her family has the Alderton portfolio. One of the oldest firms in the state." She straightened the frame, which had not been crooked. "She's at a law firm in Boston now. Very successful. We're still close with her family." She said it with the casual precision of someone who has rehearsed the line enough times that it no longer sounds like a weapon, even though it is. I smiled. I did not say anything. I filed it away in the part of my mind that keeps receipts. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Daniel proposed 11 months later at my mother's restaurant. She had moved into a proper space on Cielo by then, a beautiful spot with blue tile and herbs growing in the window boxes. He got down on one knee between the second and third course while my mother cried into her apron from the kitchen doorway. The ring was his grandmother's, a round solitaire in a platinum setting, and he'd had it resized himself before he ever asked me. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The engagement announcement went out the following week. My family called and cried, and my cousin Delia drove 4 hours to come hug me in person. The Whitmores sent a card. Cream stock, formal script, 3 sentences. We are pleased to welcome Renata to the family. We look forward to celebrating with you. Warmly, Richard and Carolyn Whitmore. Warmly. That was the word. Not love, not joy, not with open arms. Warmly. Like a contract clause. The wedding planning started immediately, because Carolyn Whitmore had been planning her son's wedding since he was approximately 8 years old, and she was not about to relinquish the production to anyone else. She had opinions about everything. The venue needed to be the Meridian Club, where the Whitmore family had held every significant event for 4 decades. The flowers needed to be white and cream only, color photographs so much better in monochrome florals, she said, which I understood to mean she did not want to see my family's taste reflected in anything that would end up framed. The guest list needed to include 180 people, of whom I knew exactly 31. I compromised where I could. I held firm where I had to. The flowers were white roses and deep burgundy dahlias. My mother's seamstress, a woman named Florencia who had been working fabric since before I was born, made my dress. Carolyn had suggested a bridal salon in Midtown whose starting price was $8,000. I thanked her and said I had it covered. She did not bring it up again, but she also did not let it go. That was Carolyn's particular skill, she never dropped anything, she just moved it to a quieter shelf. My best friend since kindergarten was a woman named Petra Voss. We had met on the first day of school at Riverside Elementary in San Marcos, standing in line outside the classroom door in September 1994. She had a lunchbox with a cartoon dog on it and I had one with stars, and we had bonded immediately over this grave aesthetic difference and been inseparable for the next 15 years. Through middle school awkwardness and high school heartbreak and 2 separate colleges where we called each other every Sunday without fail. Through her mother's illness and my father losing his job the year I was 22 and the long stretch in our late 20s when we both worked too hard and saw each other too rarely but never quite lost the thread. Petra was the first person I called when Daniel proposed. Before my mother. Before anyone. She was my maid of honor without question, without negotiation, without a single moment of doubt. She had been the maid of honor of my hypothetical wedding since we were 9 years old and decided it during recess on a Tuesday. What I did not know, what I could not have imagined, because it would have required me to believe something about Petra that I had spent 29 years building evidence against, was that Carolyn Whitmore had reached out to her 4 months before the bachelorette party. I did not know that they had met for lunch at a restaurant called Colette's in Midtown, the kind of restaurant where a glass of water arrives in crystal and nobody looks at the prices on the menu. I did not know that Carolyn had spent that lunch describing her concerns about the wedding, about me, about whether Daniel truly understood what he was choosing, about whether someone with my background could sustain a life in the world the Whitmores inhabited. I did not know that she had asked Petra, gently, graciously, over a meal that cost more than my grocery budget, to keep her informed. To be present at the bachelorette party. To observe. I did not know any of this until the night the bachelorette party ended and I found a text on Petra's phone that she had not meant for me to see. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the year between the proposal and the party, because what the Whitmores did to me during that year is the foundation under everything else. The pattern started small. It always does. A comment about the rehearsal dinner venue. We assumed you'd want something more intimate, Renata, given your family's size. A question about whether my mother's dress for the ceremony had been chosen yet, delivered with a sideways glance that made the question into a surveillance report. A suggestion, offered over a bridal lunch that Carolyn had organized without consulting me, that perhaps the ceremony readings could be from a more classical selection than the Pablo Neruda poem I had chosen. "It's a beautiful poem," she said, "but it reads a little foreign, don't you think, for a formal ceremony?" She smiled at me while she said it. I looked at her and smiled back and thought, I see you perfectly. Daniel's older sister, Meredith, was different. She was 38, married to a hedge fund manager named Clark, the mother of 2 children who were well-dressed and quietly exhausted. She wasn't cruel the way Carolyn was cruel. She was merely indifferent, which is its own kind of dismissal. She forgot my name twice in the first 6 months of the engagement, both times in front of other people, both times were covered with a laugh and a "you know what I mean, Daniel's girl." I was 33 years old. I had a master's degree in graphic design and ran my own studio with 4 full-time employees. I was not Daniel's girl. But I had learned by then how the Whitmores worked. Every correction I made was filed as aggression. Every boundary I drew was catalogued as a slight. I became very good at absorbing things I should not have had to absorb. Daniel saw some of it. He addressed what he could. He told his mother, more than once, that the wedding decisions belonged to us. He shut down 2 separate conversations about Genevieve that Carolyn attempted to introduce over family dinners. He was on my side. I believed that and I still believe it. But there is a particular exhaustion that comes from loving someone whose family requires you to constantly prove your worth, and Daniel had been living inside that exhaustion his entire life. He had normalized things that should never have been normalized. He had learned to smooth over what should have been addressed. He was kind. He was also not always enough. The bachelorette party was planned for the first weekend in March. 10 women, 2 nights in a rented house in the mountains 3 hours north of the city. Petra had organized everything, the rental, the itinerary, the welcome bags. She stayed up until 1 in the morning assembling the week before. She was meticulous about it, the way she was meticulous about everything she loved. I remember thinking, 2 days before we left, that I was the luckiest woman alive to have a friend who cared this much. The house was beautiful. Exposed wood ceilings, a wraparound deck with a view of the ridge, a fire pit that we lit the first night and sat around until almost midnight. There were 10 of us, Petra and my college roommate Danny and my cousin Delia and 6 other women I loved in varying degrees of closeness. We drank champagne out of plastic flutes because Petra knew I'd feel guilty about real crystal if someone broke one. We wore matching sashes that said bride and bride's crew in gold letters. Danny made a playlist that started with Destiny's Child and ended, around 1 in the morning, with slow 90s R&B that made everyone sentimental. The second night was quieter. Most of the group had gone to bed early. Petra and I were the last ones on the deck, wrapped in blankets, watching the fire burn down. It was the kind of night that felt like a gift, cold and clear, stars sharp through the pine branches, the whole world silent except for the wind. I had my phone on the arm of my chair, face down. Petra had set hers on the table between us while she went inside to get us both tea. I wasn't looking for anything. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I was not suspicious. I was not searching. Her phone screen lit up with a notification and I glanced over the way you glance at any light in the dark, reflexively, without intention. The preview on the screen read, "CW, hope everything is going well up there. Let me know if anything seems off with the preview cut off." But CW was enough. CW was Carolyn Whitmore. And "let me know if anything seems off" was not the message of someone checking in on a friend's bachelorette party out of warmth. It was a debrief request. It was a handler checking on an asset in the field. I sat very still. The fire had gone down to embers. I looked at the stars. I listened to the wind in the pines. I thought about 29 years of lunches and phone calls and Sunday check-ins and the lunchbox with the cartoon dog. I thought about Carolyn Whitmore at a table at Colette's, ordering for 2, explaining her concerns. I thought about Petra sitting across from her, listening, agreeing, accepting the assignment. I thought about the welcome bags Petra had stayed up until 1 in the morning assembling. I put my phone in my pocket. I folded my hands in my lap. When Petra came back through the door with 2 mugs of chamomile tea, I took mine and said thank you, and I smiled at her, and she smiled back, and I gave nothing away. Because I had learned something from 29 years of knowing Petra Voss, and 2 years of knowing the Whitmore family. I had learned that the truth is most powerful when you wait for exactly the right moment to use it. I was done waiting. It was the last night of the Bachelorette party, and I was already planning what came next. I had 63 days until the wedding. And for the first time since the night Daniel had gotten down on one knee in my mother's restaurant, I was completely, absolutely certain about what I needed to do. I did not confront Petra that night. I want you to understand why, because if you have ever been the kind of person who absorbs things quietly and waits, you already know. And if you haven't, let me explain it to you the way I came to understand it myself. Confronting someone in the dark, on a mountain, surrounded by 9 other women who are half asleep and don't know what they're in the middle of, that is not a confrontation. That is a scene. And a scene is exactly what Carolyn Whitmore would have wanted. She would have heard about it by morning. She would have framed it as instability, volatility, proof of the very concerns she had been cataloging for 2 years. Renata caused a scene at her own bachelorette party. You see? This is what we worried about. I was not going to give her that. So I drank my chamomile tea. I talked to Petra about nothing important, the fire, the drive home tomorrow, whether Delia had slept through the night or if we'd heard her laughing from the back bedroom again. I laughed at the right moments. I held my face in the shape of a woman who did not know what she knew. And when we finally said goodnight and went to our separate rooms, I lay in the dark for a long time with my hands flat on the blanket and my mind working the way it works when I have a project that matters, methodically, without panic, assembling the pieces in order. What I knew, Carolyn had contacted Petra before the bachelorette party. The message preview suggested an ongoing conversation. Hope everything is going well implied she had been updated before, that this was not the first check-in. Let me know if anything seems off meant Carolyn had a specific concern she was monitoring. Petra had accepted the role. For how long and to what degree I did not yet know. What I did not know, whether Petra had volunteered information, or only responded to prompting. Whether this was the extent of it, or whether she had been reporting back on other things, conversations I'd had with her in confidence, doubts I'd shared, moments of frustration about the wedding planning that I had trusted only to her. Whether anything she had passed along had been used against me in ways I hadn't recognized. What I needed, to know all of it before I made a single move. I drove home the next morning with Delia in the passenger seat and a coffee in the cup holder and a plan forming in the back of my mind. Delia talked most of the way. I let her. I gave her enough responses to hold up my half of the conversation while the other part of me worked quietly and alone, the way I always work best. The first thing I did when I got home was sit at my desk with a legal pad and write down every conversation I could remember having with Petra since the engagement. Not just the ones about the wedding, all of them. The ones where I'd vented about Carolyn's comment regarding the flowers. The ones where I'd told her, in a moment of exhaustion, that sometimes I wondered if Daniel would ever fully stand up to his parents. The ones where I'd described the Genevieve photograph on the sideboard and what it had felt like to stand there while Carolyn straightened the frame with that precise, deliberate hand. There were 22 conversations of substance that I could recall in enough detail to write down. I went through each one and asked myself the same question: did anything in this conversation later show up in the Whitmores' behavior toward me in a way that suggested they had been briefed? I circled 7 of them. The comment Carolyn had made at a bridal luncheon about how some people need more time to adjust to new environments, that had come 2 weeks after I'd told Petra I felt out of place at the Whitmore family's Christmas gathering. The way Richard had brought up Daniel's firm workload in a conversation that seemed pointed toward the suggestion that Daniel's professional world might eventually require a partner who understood it from the inside. That had come a month after I'd told Petra I sometimes felt invisible at Whitmore events because the conversation always returned to commercial real estate and I had nothing to add. Small things. Individually unverifiable. Together, a pattern with a shape. 7 circles on a legal pad. I looked at them for a long time. Then I called my cousin Delia. Delia Solís is 31 years old and works as a paralegal at a firm in Austin. She is the sharpest person I know and the only member of my family who had met Carolyn Whitmore and looked her directly in the eye without flinching. She had come to the engagement dinner, the one the Whitmores had hosted at the Meridian Club 6 months into the engagement, and afterward, in the car, she had said to me quietly, "That woman has already decided you're not good enough for her son. Everything she does from here is management." I had told her she was being uncharitable. She had said, "I hope I'm wrong." She was not wrong. I told Delia everything. The phone preview. The 7 circled conversations. The shape of what I suspected. She listened without interrupting, which is not her natural state, which told me she understood the gravity of it. "You need to know how long it's been going on," she said when I finished. "And you need to know what Petra actually told her. Not what you suspect. What actually happened." I knew that. The question was how. "You're not going to get it from Petra directly," Delia said. "Not if you ask her straight. She'll deny, minimize, tell you it was nothing. And then she'll warn Carolyn that you know, and Carolyn will have 60 days to get her version of events established before the wedding." She was right. And what she said next was the piece I hadn't worked out yet. "You need to let Carolyn tell you herself." I sat with that for a moment. "How?" "Carolyn doesn't know you saw that message. As far as she's concerned, the party happened," Petra reported back, "and you are still in the dark. She has no reason to be careful around you right now. She thinks she has the advantage." Delia paused. "Set up a lunch. Just you and her. Make it about wedding logistics, she'll love that. And then let her talk." It was elegant. It was also, I realized, exactly the kind of move Carolyn herself would make. I felt something shift slightly in my chest. Not anger. Not grief. Something cleaner than both. "One more thing," Delia said. "Whatever happens before the wedding, you need to decide what you're doing about Petra. That's a separate question from the Whitmores. And you need to answer it before you do anything else." I thought about the welcome bags assembled at 1 in the morning. The matching sashes. 29 years of Sunday phone calls. I thought about Petra's face across from mine at the fire pit, warm in the firelight, and whether any of that warmth had ever been reported back to a woman in a cream-colored blouse who straightened photographs that were not crooked. "I know," I said. "I'm working on it." The lunch with Carolyn happened 8 days later, on a Thursday, at a restaurant she chose, Colette's, which I only recognized by the description, crystal water glasses and no visible prices, the same place she had taken Petra. Whether she chose it deliberately or by habit I couldn't know. I chose not to ask. She arrived 2 minutes before me, already seated, which was its own small power move. She ordered for both of us without asking, sparkling water, a charcuterie plate, 2 glasses of a white burgundy I hadn't heard of. "You'll love it," she said. It's understated. Elegant without trying. I could not tell if she was describing the wine. We talked about the wedding for 40 minutes. The rehearsal dinner seating, the ceremony program, the question of whether Daniel's college roommate's speech should be capped at 5 minutes or allowed to run. Carolyn had opinions on all of it. I agreed where I could and redirected where I had to and kept my voice at exactly the temperature of a woman who was grateful for the guidance. A woman without a legal pad at home with 7 circles on it. And then, because I had been patient and agreeable and warm for 40 minutes and she was fully relaxed inside the assumption of her own control, I said, very casually, "I've been thinking about how we navigate the families after the wedding. Your world and my family's world are so different. I just want to make sure the people closest to us understand each other well enough to make that work." Carolyn tilted her head. The smile was gracious. "I think about that too," she said. "It's one of the reasons I've appreciated having Petra around. She's been a helpful perspective." There it was. I kept my face entirely neutral. "Petra's wonderful," I said. She knows me better than almost anyone. Yes. Carolyn lifted her wine glass. She's been quite candid about the adjustment you've been making. She mentioned you've had some doubts. The pressure of merging into a family like ours is real, Renata. There's no shame in finding it difficult. She set the glass down. I only want what's right for Daniel. My hands were in my lap. I pressed them flat against my thighs, steady. Of course you do, I said. I smiled at her. She smiled back. Two women at a table in Colette's, each one absolutely certain she was the one holding the advantage. Only one of us was right. I left the restaurant and sat in my car and called Delia. I told her what Carolyn had said, word for word. Delia was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, she just confirmed it to your face without realizing it. She told you Petra shared your private doubts. She told you she's been using it. And she thinks you walked out of there grateful for her guidance. Another pause. Renata, you need to record the next conversation. I knew she was right. And I knew exactly which conversation that needed to be. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The bridal shower was 3 weeks before the wedding, hosted by Carolyn at the Whitmore house in Ashford Hills. 40 women, white peonies on every surface, a catered lunch from the same firm that did the Meridian Club events. My mother drove up from San Marcos in the dress she had altered herself, pale green with cream buttons, and she looked beautiful and slightly overwhelmed and completely herself, and I loved her so much in that moment that I had to look away for a second to keep my composure. Meredith gave a toast. It was gracious enough on the surface and hollow underneath, the kind of toast that says all the correct words in the order that makes people applaud without ever once sounding like it means any of them. Petra gave a toast too. She talked about kindergarten. She talked about the lunchbox with the cartoon dog. She talked about 29 years of friendship with a sincerity that sounded so real, so warm and unperformed, that 3 women at our table wiped their eyes. I watched her face while she spoke. I had known that face for 29 years. I had read it in every mood, in grief and joy and the particular exhausted hilarity of our late 20s. I looked for the seam. I could not find it. And that, more than anything else, was what it cost me. Not the Whitmores, they had never pretended to be anything other than what they were. It was the seamlessness of Petra's face that kept me awake at 2 in the morning in the weeks that followed. I had 21 days until the wedding. Daniel and I had talked, about his parents, about the pattern, about what I needed from him in the years ahead. Those conversations were real and difficult and necessary, and they are between him and me, and I will not share the details of them here. What I will tell you is that Daniel listened. And that what he did after listening is part of why I am telling this story at all. What he did was call his mother and tell her that 3 specific things needed to change immediately: her involvement in decisions that had already been made, her practice of engaging our friends and family as informants, and her continued references to Genevieve at any gathering where I was present. He told her this on the phone with me in the room, and he did not soften it. She said very little. After he hung up, he sat beside me and said, I should have done that 18 months ago. He was right. But he had done it now. That mattered. What I had not yet done was talk to Petra. I had been waiting for the right moment, the right setting, the right version of myself, the one who had gathered every piece she needed and could walk into that conversation without being ambushed by her own grief. Because it was grief. I want to be clear about that. Whatever else it was also grief. You cannot spend 29 years loving someone and then discover something that reshapes the entire architecture of what you thought you shared, and not grieve it. Even if you never show it to a single person in the room. I asked Petra to come over for dinner 11 days before the wedding. I made my mother's chicken and rice, the kind of meal we'd eaten together 100 times. I set the table the way I always set it when it was just the 2 of us, no formality, just 2 plates and 2 glasses, and the kind of ease that had been, until very recently, the most natural thing I owned. She came with wine and a card for Daniel and the kind of easy warmth that had always been her signature. We ate. We talked about small things. And then, when the plates were cleared and the wine was low, I set my phone on the table between us, face up, recording. I said, I saw Carolyn's message at the bachelorette party. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. I counted them. Petra's face did exactly what I had known it would do, and exactly what I had hoped it wouldn't. The warmth did not drain out of it. It shifted. Like a painting where you suddenly see what the light is actually illuminating. Something underneath the warmth adjusted itself, recalculated, made a small quiet decision. And then she said, "What message?" That was her first choice. Denial. After 29 years, her first choice was denial. I said, very calmly, "The preview that came up while you were inside getting tea. CW. Let me know if anything seems off." I paused. "I also had lunch with Carolyn last week. She told me you shared my doubts with her." Her words. Another silence. Shorter this time. "It wasn't," Petra started. She stopped. She picked up her wine glass, set it down without drinking. "It wasn't like that. She reached out to me because she was worried about Daniel. She said she just wanted to make sure he was making the right choice. That's all it was. And you agreed to keep her informed. I told her you were wonderful. I told her the relationship was solid. I was defending you. You told her I had doubts. You told her I was struggling with the adjustment. I kept my voice even. Those were things I told you in confidence. In private. Things I trusted only to you." She looked at the table. "I thought I was helping. Did she ask you to come to the bachelorette party specifically?" A pause that was its own answer. "Petra. She mentioned it would be a good opportunity to." She stopped again. "Yes. She suggested it." I let that sit in the room for a moment. "I've been your friend since we were 5 years old," I said. "And a woman you'd known for 3 months asked you to report back on my bachelorette party and you said yes." Her eyes were bright. Not crying, not yet. But close. "I didn't report back. I didn't tell her anything from the party. I never sent that reply." "But you were going to." She didn't answer. Which was its own answer. I reached over and stopped the recording. I picked up my phone. I looked at Petra Voss across the table we had sat at 100 times, and I felt something I had been bracing against for 3 weeks finally arrive and pass through me, the way a cold front passes, sharp and complete and leaving the air cleaner after. "I need you to hear me," I said. "Not as my maid of honor. Not as Carolyn Whitmore source. As someone who has known me since we were 5 years old." I held her gaze. "You were the one person in my life I never had to be careful with. Do you understand what that means? I never had to measure my words with you. I never had to wonder. And you handed that to a woman who has spent 2 years trying to make me feel like I'm not enough." Petra's jaw was tight. Her eyes had filled. "Renata, I'm not asking for an explanation," I said. "I have the explanation. I'm telling you what it cost." She nodded. Barely. A small, helpless motion. I stood up and began clearing the table. After a moment, she stood too and helped me, the way she always had, the way we had moved together in kitchens for nearly 3 decades. We did the dishes in silence. She left 20 minutes later. At the door, she turned and said, "I'm so sorry." Her voice was stripped of everything except the truth of it. "I know," I said. I closed the door. I stood in my kitchen and listened to the quiet. I had 9 days until the wedding. I had a recording on my phone of Petra confirming what she had done. I had a conversation at Colette's locked in my memory where Carolyn had revealed more than she knew. I had Daniel, who had made the call that needed to be made. And I had something that the Whitmore family, in 2 years of careful, deliberate management, had never once managed to take from me. I had the truth, documented and ready, in the hands of a woman who knew exactly when to use it. The wedding was in 9 days. Carolyn Whitmore did not yet know that I had spent the last 3 weeks building something she couldn't dismantle. She did not know that the woman she had catalogued as adjusting, doubtful, not quite enough, had been watching her the entire time. She was about to find out. The morning of the wedding was gray and cold and perfect. I stood at the window of the bridal suite at the Meridian Club in my robe, drinking coffee that had gone slightly lukewarm, watching the groundskeepers set up the last of the white chair covers on the lawn below. Florencia was behind me, pressing the final seam of my dress with the kind of focused silence that meant she was almost done. My mother sat in the corner chair with her hands folded in her lap, watching me the way she had watched me my whole life, like she was memorizing something. "You're calm," she said. "I know what I'm doing," I said. She nodded. She had raised me. She understood what that meant. Delia arrived at 9 with 3 cups of coffee she hadn't needed to bring and the folder I had asked her to hold for the past 5 days. It was a plain manila folder, letter-sized, not thick. Inside it, a printed transcript of the recording from the dinner with Petra, time-stamped and labeled. A summary, written in my own hand, of the conversation at Colette's with Carolyn, the specific language she had used, the confirmation that she had characterized Petra as a helpful perspective, the admission that she had received reports about my doubts. And a single printed email, sent from Carolyn Whitmore's personal address to Petra Voss 11 weeks before the wedding, which Petra had forwarded to me 2 days after our dinner without being asked. She had sent it at 2 in the morning with no message attached. Just the forward. Just the email. It was the only apology she knew how to make, and I accepted it for what it was. The email was 4 paragraphs. It outlined, in Carolyn's precise and gracious language, exactly what she wanted Petra to observe and report. It referenced Daniel's well-being. It referenced the importance of the Whitmore family's standing. It used the phrase "someone of her background" twice. And it ended with an offer, a mention of a contact at an interior design firm in the city where Petra had been trying to get a foothold for 2 years, someone Carolyn would be happy to introduce her to, should everything go smoothly. She had not just recruited Petra. She had paid her. I had read that email 6 times before I was able to set it down without my hands shaking. Not from anger. From the clarity of it. The absolute, documented, undeniable clarity of what Carolyn Whitmore had done and what she had believed she could do without consequence. I put the folder in my bag. Florencia helped me into my dress. My mother stood up from the corner chair and pressed her hand briefly to my cheek, the way she had done before every important thing I had ever walked toward. Delia straightened my veil. I looked at myself in the mirror for one long moment. Then I went and got married. The ceremony was everything I had wanted it to be. The burgundy dahlias were exactly right against the white roses. The Neruda poem was read by my college roommate Danny in a voice that made the room go still. Daniel cried when I came down the aisle, which he will deny to anyone who asks, and I will correct the record every time. My mother sat in the front row in her pale green dress and cried openly, without embarrassment, the way only women who have earned their tears cry. Across the aisle, Carolyn Whitmore sat in ivory silk and watched with the expression of a woman attending an event she had not fully endorsed. The vows were ours. We had written them ourselves, over 2 evenings at the kitchen table with wine and crossed-out drafts and Daniel reading lines aloud in a voice that kept cracking, which made me love him in a way that has no clean word for it. When we said them in front of the room, they meant exactly what we had meant them to mean. Nothing in them had been selected by anyone else. Nothing in them had been edited for palatability. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour on the lawn, I found what I was looking for. Carolyn stood at the edge of the terrace with a glass of champagne, receiving congratulations from the long procession of Whitmore family friends who moved through her orbit like satellites. She was luminous in her ivory silk, gracious, perfectly composed. The mother of the groom at her son's wedding, exactly where she had always planned to be. I waited until the orbit thinned. Until it was just her, and the terrace, and the view of the lawn below where the cocktail tables were filling with people I loved. I walked over and stood beside her. She turned and gave me the smile, the one that lives only in the muscles around the mouth. "Renata," she said. "You look beautiful." "Thank you, Carolyn," I said. "I need 5 minutes with you before dinner." Something moved behind her eyes. Very small. Very fast. The recalibration of a woman who has spent decades reading rooms. "Of course," she said. "Is everything all right?" "It will be," I said. I led her to the small sitting room just inside the terrace doors, the one the venue used as a quiet space for the wedding party. It was empty. The noise of the cocktail hour was muffled behind the glass. I closed the door. I set my bag on the side table and took out the folder. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Everything I had needed to say, I said in the same register I used when I was presenting work to a difficult client, clear, precise, without apology. "I know about the email you sent Petra," I said. "I have a copy of it. I know what you asked her to do and I know what you offered her in exchange." I opened the folder and placed the printed email on the table between us, face up. "I also have a recording of Petra confirming the arrangement. And I have my own notes from our lunch at Colette's, including the specific language you used about my background and my doubts." Carolyn looked at the email. She did not pick it up. Her champagne glass was very still in her hand. "I'm not showing you this to threaten you," I said. "I'm showing you this because I want you to understand exactly what I know, and exactly what today is." I paused one beat. "Today is the day I marry your son. It is not the day you manage your family's exposure. It is not the day you decide whether I am enough. That decision was made. I am here. And I intend to stay." She was quiet. The kind of quiet that has texture, not empty, but full of things she was choosing not to say. "Renata," she started. "I'm not finished," I said. Not unkindly. But clearly. "I am not the woman you described to Petra in that email. I am not an adjustment problem or a background concern or a risk to your family's standing. I am Daniel's wife as of 40 minutes ago, and I will be for the rest of our lives. And the way you treat me from this day forward will determine what kind of relationship we have." I closed the folder. "That is a choice I am giving you. I did not have to give you that choice. I want you to understand the difference." The room was very quiet. Through the glass doors I could hear, faintly, the sound of the cocktail hour, the low hum of people I loved in a warm space together. Carolyn set her champagne glass down on the side table. She looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before and did not have an immediate name for. Not anger. Not the gracious performance. Something stripped of both. She was 61 years old and she was looking at me the way a person looks when they have been seen clearly for the first time in a long time and do not yet know how to hold it. "I did what I believed was right for my son," she said finally. Her voice was controlled, but thinner than usual. The architecture of it had shifted. "I know you did," I said. "That doesn't make it right." She had no answer for that. I had not expected one. "The folder stays with me," I said. "I have no intention of sharing it with anyone, as long as today remains what it's supposed to be." I picked up my bag. "I hope you'll enjoy the dinner, Carolyn. I mean that genuinely." I walked to the door. I had my hand on the handle when she spoke. "She has a good eye." Her voice was quiet. Almost to herself. "Florencia. The dress. It's exceptional work." I turned. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the middle distance, at something I couldn't see. It was not an apology. It was not even close to one. But it was the first true thing she had said to me in 2 years, and we both knew it. "Yes," I said. "She does." I went back out to my wedding. The dinner was long and warm and full of the kind of laughter that fills the spaces between the formal things and makes them worth attending. My father's oldest friend gave a toast that referenced a song my father used to play in his classroom, a melody I hadn't heard in years, and I had to press my hand to my mouth for a moment to keep myself together. Daniel's college roommate went 4 minutes over his time limit and nobody minded. My mother danced with Daniel's father in a moment that happened without planning, the two of them moving awkwardly and genuinely to a slow song, and I watched from across the room and thought, this is what I wanted. Not the white roses and the crystal and the correct number of guests. This. The clumsy, honest, imperfect warmth of two families finding the small places where they fit. Carolyn did not speak to me again privately that evening. She was gracious at dinner, attentive to the guests around her, present in all the ways that were visible. Whether the conversation in the sitting room had landed anywhere it would stay, I didn't know yet. Some things take time to settle into the bones of a person. I was prepared to wait. Meredith caught me near the end of the evening, by the cake table, and said, almost carefully, "You looked very calm tonight." "All evening." She paused. "I don't think I've ever seen someone as calm at their own wedding." "I had everything I needed," I said. She nodded slowly, and something in her face shifted in a way I chose to take as a beginning. As for Petra, she was not at the wedding. When I had called her, 6 days before, to tell her I was removing her from the maid of honor role, she had not argued. She had said, "I understand," in a voice that sounded like someone setting down a very heavy thing. I had told her the truth plainly. I did not yet know what our friendship was or whether it could be rebuilt into something I trusted again. I was not closing the door. I was not slamming it. I was stepping back from it and giving both of us the room to figure out what came next without the pressure of a performance in front of 200 people. She had said, "That's fair." And then, very quietly, "I'm sorry, Renata. For all of it." I had believed her. Belief and trust are not the same thing, and I was being careful not to confuse them. Delia stood with me instead. She wore the dress Petra had been measured for, altered by Florencia in 4 days, and she walked down the aisle with her chin up and her eyes bright and the expression of a woman who was exactly where she was supposed to be. After the ceremony she had pulled me into a hug and said, "Your grandfather would have loved this." My grandfather had been gone for 11 years. But I knew what she meant. In the months that followed the wedding, things shifted in the small, undramatic ways that real change tends to move. Carolyn did not become a different person. She was still precise, still controlled, still the woman who straightened photographs that were not crooked. But the particular quality of her management changed. The comments about background stopped. The Genevieve references disappeared entirely. When she called, and she did call, regularly, because she loved her son and she was learning, slowly and imperfectly, to extend that love outward, she asked questions that had actual interest in them. She asked about my studio. She asked about a project I mentioned once in passing and remembered 4 weeks later. It was not warmth, exactly. Not at first. But it was effort, and effort, consistently applied, becomes something. The interior design contact she had dangled in that email to Petra, she mentioned it to me, without preamble, at a family dinner 3 months after the wedding. Just passed the name across the table the way she had once passed a photograph on a sideboard. I took it. I followed up. The connection led to a collaboration that brought my studio one of its best commissions in 2 years. I did not thank her in a way that acknowledged what the offer had once been attached to. She did not require me to. We were both, in our separate ways, building something on top of the wreckage of what had come before. We were choosing it. Daniel and I talked about all of it, the full architecture of what his mother had done, the email, the arrangement with Petra, the years of quiet management. We talked about it the way you talk about something that has to be held and examined before it can be put in its right place. He was angry in the way of someone whose anger comes from love, not at me, at the years of it, at the shape it had taken. He said, more than once, that he wished I had told him sooner. I told him, more than once, that I needed to be sure before I handed him something he couldn't unhear. He understood. We moved forward. I spoke to Petra for the first time, really spoke, about 4 months after the wedding. A phone call that lasted 2 hours, the way our calls had always lasted when there was something real in them. She told me everything, the lunch at Colette's, the flattery, the way Carolyn had framed it as protection for Daniel, the slow process by which she had rationalized it to herself until the rationalization wore through. She told me about the design contact being offered and what it had felt like to realize, afterward, what she had been willing to accept it for. She was not making excuses. She was explaining, which is a different thing. I listened to all of it. We are not what we were. I do not think we will be. But we are something, carefully and honestly built, and I am choosing to tend it and see what it becomes. 29 years of a person does not vanish because one of them made a choice that broke something. It changes shape. You decide whether the new shape is worth something. I am still deciding. What I know is this: the folder is still in my desk at home. I have not opened it since the wedding. I don't need to. It did its work. It sat in that sitting room between two women and said the thing that could not be unsaid, and then I put it away, because carrying it past the moment it was needed would only have made it heavier than it ever needed to be. My grandmother's name was Renata. She came to this country with $40 and a sewing kit and the absolute refusal to be made small by people who had decided, before she opened her mouth, what she was worth. My mother told me this story every year on my birthday. I thought about it the morning of the wedding, standing at the window watching the groundskeeper set out the white chair covers, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm. I thought about it again last month, sitting at a dinner table in Ashford Hills, watching Carolyn Whitmore pass the bread basket to my mother and ask her how business was at the shop on Cielo Boulevard. Watching my mother's face open up the way it opens when she is talking about something she loves. Watching Carolyn listen, not perform listening, but actually listen, in the halting, imperfect, clearly practiced way of someone who is trying to learn a new thing at 61. It is not the ending I would have written for us 2 years ago. It is something harder and more honest and, I think, more durable. The things that are built on truth tend to be. I did not let the Whitmore family write my story. I did not let them decide what I was worth or how I fit or whether I belonged. I showed up with my grandmother's name and my mother's dress and a manila folder in my bag, and I told the truth to the person who needed to hear it. Quietly. In a room with no audience. Without screaming, without theater, without performing a version of myself that anyone else had scripted. That is the only vindication I ever needed. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.